Cool, man. What you drinking today?
Yeah, so I bought this Beavertown Neck Oil IPA. I don't know if you can see it in the light. It's got a pretty cool design, but I don't know. I was at the food section in the Waitrose, and like the can looks really sick, so I bought it, and I'm checking this out. It's like 4.3%, so it's pretty chill. But yeah, that's what I've got today. What are you rocking with?
That's super awesome. I'm going for a Belgian beer. I first found out at Brussels Airport, and I gotta say, it's pretty good. My favorite beer. And Leffe.
Yeah, yeah. Leffe is good. I've got some good memories from like when I lived in Dubai before uni. Actually, I shouldn't be talking about this, but yeah, that was a great beer, and I've had it a few times when I was over 18. Obviously, at international airports as well, in Poland where it's legal, for example, or like the UK. But it's good. It's good. It's I think 5-6% as well. No.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's 6.6, so it's quite a strong beer, but all the
That's
better.
good. It's strong. It's nice. It's nice. It's got a good taste. Like this one, like I said, it's 4.3. It's decent. It's soft. It's really soft. But aside from that, I guess we can start talking about maybe either the budget or the vaccine tracker and see what's happening because we have two topics that we're going to be talking about today. So which one do you want to get started with?
Yeah, dude, 100%. Let's have a look at the budget. I'll pop open the little beer. I don't know if you've already opened yours, but
Yeah, no, it's in a can. It's in a can, so that is not. Oh yeah, I've started drinking that as well. But you said budget, yeah.
couldn't resist.
So the yeah, man, I'm a few steps ahead. But yeah, what's been happening is that yesterday, which is Wednesday, today we're filming on Thursday. The UK announced this new budget for the upcoming year, and essentially, sorry, the budgetary outlook for the next few years in terms of like tax freezes, what is happening with different taxes, and in essence, I'll quickly cover some of the big changes which we thought were kind of cool. The government, actually, one of the big issues right now, I don't know, one of the big points of the entire budget thing is that the government is going to guarantee mortgages worth as much as 95% of the home's value. So, that's one thing which a few people sent me the link to that article talking about that specific item on the agenda because it seems like it's something you would have heard, the 12 years ago now, 13 years ago, 15 years ago, with the previous great financial crash. It's very, you've got a problem of productivity and wages perhaps not going up as much as you have wealth going up in terms of mortgage debt or debt itself, right? So you have the nominally priced assets appreciating and people getting more quote unquote wealthy, which is fueled by debt, but their ability to purchase homes, especially with our generation, especially with younger people, we don't necessarily have an increasing ability to purchase these homes, increasingly more expensive homes with perhaps more stagnant wages or productivity levels. So that's a problem which, again, is reflective of just over a decade ago. It's quite weird to hear it. It's, one thing that we can what can be said about history and people learning is the fact that the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. When it comes to us humans, it's kind of funny. It's weird that at the same time, perhaps I'm missing some of the mechanics. Perhaps it's more of like a headline to get people to purchasing homes and be more confident rather than, well, yeah, the great financial crisis, at least what we saw in this, some of the US with like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I think they were called, in terms of just how accessible purchasing housing was to anyone, really. I know that there's meant to be like ninja loans as well under this headline, like the no income, no job, still buying homes, that kind of stuff. So we'll see how that works out. But I guess we have a decent case study of that. What else? There's corporate tax rises. So the corporate tax is going to be rising to 25%, even though there has been a super deduction for investment specifically. So there's more investment allowances. So even though you're giving with the investment allowances on the one hand, you're taking away back with a higher corporate tax in the end, or corporation tax in the end. So, give and take scenario, I think is just meant to spur investment relative to other business, essentially operations, I don't know, or anything that you can do with capital. You're going to have a better tax optimization strategy available to you by investing rather than other sources of other uses of funds. So yeah, corporate corporate tax, corporation tax, whatever. Rishi Sunak also announced the first 8 locations for the so-called free ports, which are like special economic zones. That reminds me of like China from the 1980s. This is like emerging market stuff, but at the same time, it's great. I guess special economic zones, the more the merrier. You want to have, in my opinion, freer trade, freer movement of goods. With the EU, you had that quite literally amongst the EU members, obviously. So yeah, those special economic zones are going to have tax cuts and some other incentives. And there's just a whole lot more borrowing essentially projected. And above all, there's a lot of tax freezes, right? There's a tax freeze on alcohol, for example. That was one of the headline issues as well. Yeah, great. And oh yeah, and one thing that I wanted to say about that, it's like, hey, it kind of seems nonsensical. But what I said is that, hey, a tax hike on beer and other stuff is the last thing we need when we're prospective outgoers, this summer when the restrictions start falling down. That a tax increase might disincentivize us from going out and spending a lot of money on food and drink. So I was thinking, with that tax freeze, or at least with the announcement of no increases in taxes for the nominal price of beer, we might be still more enticed to go out and spend. And when I say we're going to go out no matter what when we are able to go out. But I guess public in general, it kind of makes you ask, like, okay, what's so special about the alcohol duty specifically, right? And I think that could be.
I think that's just the lobby. I know that the whiskey lobby from Scotland is one of the strongest in the UK, just because of how much exports they have. They might have been struggling with sales. I'm not actually sure. I'm just speculating here, but because bars aren't open and people don't drink as much, I think it might just be them lobbying.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because in the end of the day, with the taxes, that gets passed on to the consumers, right? So it's a cost essentially, and whether the business or the consumer pays that, it still disincentivizes people's purchase of that good. So whether that is from the perspective of lobby groups or like consumers wanting to go out and buy that kind of stuff or whatever, I guess you can have the double. But at the same time, announcing a tax freeze, we'll see how that goes. But the problem with this is the fact that everyone's speaking in nominal terms. Even like Rishi Sunak, when he gave his statement, he said, I quote, "I know the British people don't like tax rises, nor do I." He also said after that, "But I also know they dislike dishonesty even more." Okay, there's not much other use to a politician than dishonesty, really. But the point here is that even though the tax aren't rising, and the tax freezes mean that nominal taxes aren't rising, and that people might be paying not much less in taxes on nominal terms, and therefore might be keeping more of their nominal income. This doesn't then take into account what is happening on real terms, right? Because the problem here is rising inflation and the outlook for higher inflation, which is what central banks and governments are trying to do in terms of reinflating and then inflating essentially the expansion of money, right? The point here is that central banks have upped their target of inflation because it's been underperforming or has been under the long-term average for the past decade. So they want it to notch a bit above. But the point here is that, okay, what does that mean for tax and for earnings? Well, from another article, I'm going to take an example. And I say, quote, "If inflation were to rise 2.5% a year over the next 4 years of the freeze, then someone on a salary of £60,000 would end up paying a total of 3,312 more British pounds in income tax than they would have done," right? Because even though the tax brackets aren't rising, or your taxes aren't rising, your tax-free allowance is also not rising. But at the same time, your nominal income is rising, right? So you get that kind of interest in you're not paying more in taxes because the taxes aren't increasing. But at the same time, yes, you are, because your nominal income is right in nominal terms. So in real terms, especially with inflation, as per this example, or what the governments or central banks may wish to achieve in the future, that's just an interesting point that's not being talked about. And what isn't, this is very long-winded what I've been saying, but what also isn't being talked about is all the great benefits and opportunities that Brexit has for the recovery that Britain now wishes to pursue, right? Specifically underlying that there is a lack of any. So, yeah.
I wanted to comment about that corporate tax rate because I think it's actually very much because of Brexit. Because when they were in the European Union, all of the countries are competing for companies being headquartered there. So
Yeah.
Ireland and the Netherlands all have low tax rates. But now that they've left, companies either get to stay in the UK if they want to access that market, or they don't. So they can easily raise the tax rate, and if somebody wants to access the UK market, they have to stay. But at the same time, they're also facing this low productivity. So they're like, how do we incentivize that? And then that's why you get the deductibles. So I think it's actually a super smart move that they make up for the lost income from the deductibles, and they get the benefit of the extra investment. And I think
that's quite an interesting point in the fact that they have a monopoly over the access to the UK market in terms of like, if you want to, I mean, I don't know how the regulations work. I'm sure there's more loopholes than there are actual regulations and lines of regulation and whatever code. But the point is that generally speaking, if we were to assume that, everyone follows these rules of integrity, if you want to access the UK market, you're going to have to set up some operations in the UK, or at least abide by their code of conduct, regulations, whatever. And therefore, if you want to access that, you're going to have to take on whatever corporation tax they wish to, use, because you can't anymore, for example, I don't know, set up a place in Ireland and then through Ireland get into all of the EU markets, that's basically what you said. But that's very smart, actually. So we'll see how that works out for them. Best of luck.
Let's see what Rishi Sunak has up his sleeve.
It's funny because that's the thing when it comes to like Brexit opportunities and benefits. Yeah, it's been a benefit for the government in terms of the tax hike. But at the same time, I did also want to kind of not so rebut my own argument, but I did want to talk about the rising taxes and the fact that this is to pay for COVID, at least partially. Obviously there is a lot of debt and problems which the government has preceding COVID. But the point that our taxes are going to rise, that was almost inevitable, if not even something that people were expecting, and kind of like, admitting that is the truth, right? There's been a crisis. Myself, who is not myself specifically, but someone who is well off and is paying income tax, they might have said, my taxes are going to rise because I'm paying for other people's furlough and trying to keep everyone, alive and kicking. Really, that's what it came down to in the end. And at the same time, not allow inequality to worsen by what it could have done without all these furlough schemes. So I think it's important to say that when it comes to these tax rises in nominal terms and how the government is actually taxing you in secret, I don't want to say that's okay, but it's right. It's more understandable when it's, you can't just be, my taxes are increasing, I'm therefore very pissed off, right? That's not looking at it completely holistically. And at the same time, I feel like we still need to incorporate a bit of like a communal feel in the world, in our countries, when it comes to helping each other out, fiscal transfers, that kind of stuff, which we've seen. And I mean, we weren't going to get away without higher taxes with all the spending that's been happening, right? And when you want to talk about fiscal frugality and balancing the budget, you can talk about it, but amidst the crisis, especially when the government prevents people from working, doing this, that, and the other, and earning income, they need to compensate them for it. Now is not the time to stop balancing the budget. It's quite difficult, and it's easy to say when you're well off, but it's hard to then. It's a case of like someone who's warm isn't going to understand the one who's cold, right? So it's just that kind of stuff. So it's important to look at this kind of budget announcements and the taxes, this, that, and the other, from different perspectives.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then it's interesting they only targeted the corporates, not the consumers, because that would have killed their electoral chances. So I'm curious to see how they tax consumers more. But
I mean, at the end of the day, like the tax is passed usually onto the consumers. So at the end of the day, whoever's purchasing the product, the end consumer, is paying the tax. Usually, if you're working in an industry with a good or service that is more elastic in supply than is in demand, you can essentially pass on the tax more so to the consumer down on the producer. So when you talk about tax rates and tax hikes, people are paying for it in not even unconventional ways. This is just, you need to have a deeper understanding of what's going on. Just because they're not taxing your income or because they're not taxing your cigarettes or alcohol more doesn't mean they're not taxing you. And it doesn't mean that you won't necessarily have less money at the end of the day, but that was sort of inevitable given the crisis and everything. And yeah.
Fair. That's a super comprehensive review of the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. We've been live for like 15 minutes. I feel like I've just been nonstop talking, like barely any stuttering, no nothing, just straight up. But at the same time, it's good. Like, that's good. I feel like it's important to understand the budget because it touches into so many aspects of like really our everyday lives. Like, oh, are we getting taxed or not? Are we getting to keep the income or not? Should we be paying more taxes or not? Is there questions? But I think I do pose at least a partial answer, or at least a way of thinking about these questions and answers with what I just said, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. But I'm sure like some more analysis will come out next week, and then we can comment on that because some other people always spot different stuff. But yeah, do you want to talk about the vaccines now? We'll have a look and an update on the vaccine rollout.
Yeah. Sure. So, I do have some comments by the chief economist of UniCredit. He posts weekly Sunday wraps you literally just type in, UniCredit Sunday wrap, whatever, it'll pop up. Great stuff. I suggest everyone reads it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 page letter every week. Great commentary on whatever is moving the markets, especially from a macro perspective. A lot of talk about vaccines, but I'll share my screen now. So I can show the vaccine vaccine stuff. So yeah, well, I don't remember specifically what it looked like last week because we did also showcases last week, but I do know, just because I live in the UK, that now we've crossed the 30% of population vaccinated. So we're nearing a third of people vaccinated. We've given 32 doses per 100 people. So again, I think we talked a bit more in depth why, actually comparing the different approaches to first dose and then second dose given to patients, such as in Poland, more so than just first dosing everyone in the UK. And in the US, you've got a sort of in between. But nevertheless, in the UK, yeah, we've moved to 31% of the population. That's a third. And I feel like this has been a good development for the UK. When it comes to policy and management and vaccine rollout. It's hard to say what the perfect crisis management would have looked like in the UK, but just kind of looking at this retrospectively, the extensive government support, although it hasn't been conservative at all, and today's conservatives are a lot different than conservatives in the past. I guess you got to give some credit to where credit is due, and when it looks like the vaccine rollouts, especially.
Exactly. The vaccine rollout's been insane. I mean, the only one that's really doing better is the UAE. And if you hover over Israel, you'll be shocked at the percentage.
Yeah, that's insane. Israel was 53.5% one shot and nearly 40% fully vaccinated. So that's almost half of the population. I think herd immunity, you need 60% of the population fully vaccinated. I think that's the definition. I mean, it depends where you see, but I do believe that is the vast majority. So at least 60%, if not more, you want for, the official kind of definition of herd immunity. Israel is very close.
And then it depends also on the effectiveness of the vaccine. Because if it's 90%, then you're going to need 66%. But if it's a 50% effective vaccine, you're going to need to go up to 100% vaccination for it to
right. Yeah. Good point. Yeah, that's also very important to keep in mind, because you can have 100% of the population vaccinated, but if the vaccine is 10% effective, then you might as well have had that's the same as vaccinating 10% of the population with 100% effectiveness vaccine elsewhere. So I think the UK, that's also what we talked about last week in terms of why it's so high in the first dose and not just in the second. And that's because the first dose provides good effectiveness against the worst case scenario that people might face. So when it comes to immediately solving, or at least alleviating some of the problems when it comes to the healthcare system, this first dose sort of does the job. Before then moving on to fully vaccinating everyone.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see whether the European governments actually decide to change their strategy, because they've got 1,000 deaths a day. I think it's ludicrous to say
Yeah.
that we need to give double vaccines because there's so many old people. They have to vaccinate all of them at least once. Like I think I haven't done the calculation, but I think out of intuition that if you vaccinate them all once and it's 60% effective as opposed to 90% effective, you're actually saving more lives. That's I need to check it, but
Yeah, I mean, this really does depend.
So,
sorry,
because every day you don't vaccinate someone, they have a chance of dying, and especially
right? Yeah,
so,
for sure. I mean, it's horrible, right? I do know that just kind of looking at Poland and the figures, the amount of weekly deaths that you have, or daily deaths, or just deaths, whatever in whatever time period, it is horrible to see the development and how it at some point caught up and even surpassed the UK. I think it was relatively close in terms of the deaths per number of deaths a day, even though the UK has, I think, 24 million more inhabitants, especially with. You also have to consider this when analyzing the UK. You have about 20 million people in London, right? So it is, in that regard, you have a third of the population roughly just very densely condensed. I don't know, in a dense urban population area, right? But I mean, point being, it's not great. And actually, this is where the comment from the UniCredit chief economist comes in. He talked about essentially the vaccination rollout in the UK, for Europe as opposed to the US, I think he talked about, or basically I'll just read it out. For Europe, and I quote, "For Europe, I don't know why the vaccination rollout is moving so slowly. As of Friday, this is last week, I understand that less than 20% of the AstraZeneca vaccine delivered to Germany, France, and Italy had been administered. And here I was thinking that the European healthcare and public administration more broadly was world class. But if we can't vaccinate the population in a pandemic at nearly the rate achieved in other countries, I guess we'll need to think again." And that is a very interesting point. And you've got two-pronged problem here. Is the fact that I think, what did he say? Like 20% of the vaccine delivered to Germany, France, and Italy has been administered. That's insane. That's you might as well not have bought the other 80%, right? And you might have just, I don't know, done anything with that money. It's gone to burn. And then secondly, secondly, what's also interesting is the fact that people always talk about the European healthcare system and basically just being very great, as opposed to like the US, where you have to pay a lot of money or it's expensive. And this one instant doesn't prove or disprove any hypothesis. But Europe specifically is doing, mainland Europe is doing very poorly giving out the vaccines. Even respective when it comes to Poland, Poland is doing better than some of these countries like Italy and France and Germany. And I'm not trying to shit on Poland, but we've got our own problems in terms of the populist government, and I guess at the end of the day, our own process of the vaccine rollout. But we're still pushing ahead better than these other countries.
It's about management. This is about management and being able to deliver projects more than your healthcare system, because this is something completely new. You have to set up vaccine centers. You have to reach out to people. You have to create IT systems. And if you don't have a good managerial class that can deliver that, like they have in the UK with their good sourcing and their good planning, then this just kind of shows which countries can actually deliver on projects and which countries aren't very good at developing new projects and infrastructure and all of this. That's, at least in Italy, what we found is that the local and regional authorities just can't plan properly and can't implement. And that this is what turned out to be. But by the way, cool article. Unless you had something else to say, I had a cool article about Israel looking at different population segments and their behaviors and how that impacted how much COVID deaths they had.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can check that out.
Cool. Let me just share my screen. Oh, here we go. Yeah, basically, so in Israel, for those people who don't know, there's a segment of society who are called ultra-Orthodox Jews. So they get a pension from the government throughout their whole life, and they just spend a lot of time reading texts and reading religious texts. And they're also very skeptical of vaccines, and they're very skeptical of the virus and of the government. And in some ways, it's quite a fractured society because they're disliked by the secular people who live in Israel, because they don't pay any taxes, they don't work, but they receive a pension. And now with the with the COVID pandemic, they've not respected any of the rules, and they've just spent time continuing meeting. So you can see here in this graphic in pink are these communities of ultra-Orthodox, and you can see the difference between the rest of the population, Arabs and non-Haredi Jews, and the Haredi Jews. So the other ones more or less respected the COVID restrictions, but these Haredi Jews have a lot of political capital in Israel. So they completely disrespected and disregarded the COVID restrictions, and the police didn't do anything about it because they had so much political capital. And so you can see the difference between the ones who had to comply with restrictions and the ones who didn't. And it's actually quite interesting because this is a photo from a funeral of somebody who died, and there's been quite a few high-level people within the community of ultra-Orthodox Jews that died from COVID, but they still anyways met like this, and this is a massive super spreader event effectively. Yeah, and then at the same time, they're also very skeptical of vaccines, so it means that they get a lot more deaths, and they're just a super spreader. I'm just going to see if there's any more. Yeah, sorry, let's see a comment.
Yeah, can you go back to the first graph that you showed with the pickups in the infection rates?
There we go.
Per 100K. Okay, I see. Now I was wondering because you can see that although those the different groups experience different pickups in essentially infection rates, they experience them at the same time. So although aside from June to August of 2020, you saw as you said, the Haredi Jews picking up more. I mean, yeah, still much more than the other groups, but nevertheless, yeah, no, that's quite interesting data. I guess it'd be interesting to now kind of not quickly, but specifically look at how, yeah, like you said, these different activities and things done by people in general, behaviors, translate into whether or not it causes higher infection, because this is obviously given by 100,000 people, so it's adjusted to a sort of population basis. But yeah, I feel like if certain groups are more kind of involved in like these kind of, like you said, super spreader events, then you will see these this reflected in the infection rates. Because I do know that in general, when it comes to the world, it's not everyone doing a lot of the infecting. It's specific people, or for example, instead of me and you and everyone around us going out and infecting one more person when we get COVID, it's only maybe one in a group of 10 that infects another 4 or 3 or something, right? I'm just getting these statistics out of the thin air, but the point is that there's a uneven distribution of these kind of in how people get infected, and obviously that kind of makes it makes sense when you look at groups who, yeah, like you said, attend more of these super spreader events, or more loosely following restrictions or not following them at all. You'll see more pickups of these infections in these groups. I mean, are these groups specifically very segregated in Israel? Because could there be a lot of cross-contamination in these groups, or do they live in different areas of Israel, or because we saw very distinct patterns in that graph.
That's very interesting. I'm not actually sure, but in the article they mentioned that a lot of the Haredi Jews, they all live in a certain neighborhood in Jerusalem.
Right.
And this graphic I was just showing a second ago, you can see the gray bar at the bottom is actually how many have already had COVID, and you can see the non-Haredi and the Arab Jews, the Arabs in Israel have a much lower rate than the Haredi Jews. That might be something
right
that normally linked with behavior, and it might be something else. I'm not sure, but no, it was just interesting because a lot of the time, we don't know if these COVID restrictions work or what impact they have. And I was like, oh, finally, this is an interesting case study to see how it affects different people and different communities.
That's very interesting, and it's like a good note to keep in mind, because although we're very tired, and that's fully understandable of these restrictions, it's still I feel like it gives you some sort of retribution, at least, to the behavior that you've kind of had over the past year or whatever. Because some people might have still been going out and meeting people, but for example, you and I know that personally I haven't been someone who hasn't been following the restrictions, and specifically I get some feeling, like I said, of retribution for not doing that, for keeping, for example, I don't know, my family, my grandparents safe. So that's a bit of a silver lining, but it's also a good note to end on. It's that, I think, article specifically gives you some decent evidence because it's very distinct, like you said, those divisions or differences specifically of these different groups.
Exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And especially when you're living with your parents, you're very careful because you care about them. So that's
right.
But yeah, this has been super good. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, good talk. Good talk.
Yeah, and I'm sure next week we'll examine again. We'll look at how the rollout is going. Italy has a new government, so hopefully vaccines are going better with a Draghi government. Let's see how the rest of Europe goes. And Malta is actually imposing new restrictions, so all the restaurants are closing now.
Damn.
So because the case numbers are coming up. So actually, the UK, you guys might actually do well and be lucky, and you might actually go get to see the rugby at the pub.
That's great.
So let's see.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna find out soon enough, I guess.
Exactly. Cool. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and see you next week.
See ya.